Tommy Lee Jones has never been a man who belonged to Hollywood. For more than 5 decades, the world saw him on the screen as a figure of unshakable grit, a man whose very presence could quiet a room. Yet outside of the films that made him iconic, The Fugitive, Men in Black, No Country for Old Men, Jones was something far more elusive, a man who chose silence, who chose solitude, who chose the long, lonely landscapes of Texas over the glitter of red carpets. At 79, the man once considered Hollywood's last cowboy has become a figure of deep contradiction. A legend whose name carries power, yet a human being increasingly absent from the world that once celebrated him. Fans who rarely see him now whisper about his health, about his isolation, about the way time has crept up on him. And in those whispers lies something heartbreaking, the reality that even the strongest men cannot outrun age, that even cowboys eventually dismount their horse for the final time. As we look back at what happened to Tommy Lee Jones at 79, we see not just the decline of a star but the fading of a man who embodied an entire American spirit. And it is here, in the quiet truth of his later years, that the tears come hardest. From the very beginning, Tommy Lee Jones was different from the stars around him. While others smiled for photographers, he turned away. While others sought talk shows, magazine spreads and late-night laughter, Jones sat back with folded arms, his weathered face unreadable. Hollywood to him was not a playground, it was work. And work was meant to be done with dignity, not spectacle. Critics and fans quickly labeled him as the gruff man who never smiles, but that was only the surface. The truth was that Tommy Lee Jones lived with a seriousness that most of Hollywood couldn't understand. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing authenticity. Every role he accepted, every line he delivered, came with a weight that reminded audiences that acting in his hands wasn't play. It was truth-telling. Directors often remarked on his intensity. Some found it intimidating, others found it inspiring. By the 1990s, when he had become one of the most respected actors in the business, Jones was already known as the man who would disappear when the cameras stopped rolling. No red carpets. No Hollywood gossip columns. Instead, he would be on his cattle ranch in San Saba, Texas, repairing fences or riding horses. To his fellow actors, this made him mysterious. To the public, it made him unforgettable. But beneath the surface was something quieter, almost fragile. Jones was a storm contained in silence, a man who carried both power and loneliness in equal measure. And in Hollywood, that made him one of a kind. To understand the man Tommy Lee Jones became, you must first return to the dust and heat of San Saba, Texas, where he was born in 1946. He was not born into fame or privilege. His father worked in the oil fields, rough and often absent, while his mother worked as a police officer and also ran a beauty shop to help keep the family afloat. Life was not glamorous, it was survival. Jones grew up in a world where toughness was not a choice but a necessity. He was the only child, often left to navigate the silence of rural Texas on his own. He found companionship in wide-open spaces, in the hard work of ranch life, in the quiet resilience of people who endured more than they spoke about. This upbringing would shape him forever, the stillness, the strength, the suspicion of showiness. Teachers noticed early on that he had both an iron will and a sharp mind. He wasn't just tough, he was thoughtful. That duality, brawn and intellect, would define him. Yet, he never quite fit into the mold expected of him in small-town Texas. His mother pushed him to pursue education, believing her son was capable of more than the oil rigs or cattle work that had defined generations before him. It was this push, combined with his own determination, that led Tommy Lee Jones to a place no one in his hometown could have imagined, Harvard University. From the Texas plains to the ivy-covered walls of Cambridge, the boy who grew up fixing fences and living under the shadow of oil rigs was about to walk into a new world. A world that would test not only his mind but his very identity. When Tommy Lee Jones arrived at Harvard University, he seemed like an odd fit. Here was a boy raised in the ruggedness of Texas, walking into a world of elite privilege and academic tradition. Yet, he did not just survive there, he thrived. At Harvard, he studied English literature, immersing himself in the works of Shakespeare, Faulkner, and Hemingway. But Jones was never simply the quiet bookworm. He was also a force on the football field, where he played offensive guard for the Harvard Crimson. In the late 1960s, the Harvard-Yale rivalry was fierce, and Jones was in the thick of it. Teammates described him as relentless. The same intensity he would later bring to acting was already visible on the field. One of the most surprising details of his Harvard years is who his roommate was, Al Gore, the man who would go on to become Vice President of the United States. The two formed a bond built not on Hollywood glitz or political ambition, but on the quiet camaraderie of two young men shaping their futures. Gore would later say that Jones was brilliant, fiercely loyal, and uncompromising in everything he did. At Harvard, Jones developed an intellectual curiosity that stayed with him for life. He wasn't chasing celebrity or spotlight, he was chasing meaning. His love for literature would become the foundation for the kind of actor he became, not just a performer, but a storyteller deeply concerned with truth and human complexity. And yet, even in Cambridge, he remained something of an outsider. While many of his classmates prepared for Wall Street or politics, Jones was restless. He wanted something else, something undefined. That restless energy would carry him out of Harvard and straight into one of the most uncertain paths a young man could choose: acting. The transition from Harvard to the stage was not glamorous. After graduating in 1969, Tommy Lee Jones moved to New York City with little more than determination. Broadway and off-Broadway stages were crowded with dreamers, and Jones was just another face, but not for long. He began with small roles, including a debut in a production of A Patriot for Me in 1969. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get his foot in the door. Soon after, he found work in television, joining the cast of the daytime soap opera One Life to Live. Soap operas were a proving ground for many actors, but Jones brought to the role an intensity that stood out from the standard melodrama. Those early years were not easy. Money was scarce, and recognition was even scarcer. But Jones had something that set him apart. He wasn't interested in fame, only in the work. He studied scripts obsessively, breaking down motivations, searching for honesty in every line. Directors noticed. Fellow actors noticed. This young man from Texas carried himself with a seriousness far beyond his years. It was during this period that he began landing small but memorable film roles, slowly carving out a space in Hollywood that was uniquely his. He wasn't a leading man in the traditional sense. He didn't have the smooth charm of Robert Redford or the boyish energy of Dustin Hoffman. What he had was something deeper, a raw, undeniable authenticity. Every rejection, every small part, every low-paying gig hardened him, just as the Texas sun once had. He was not just surviving the grind of early acting, he was sharpening himself for the roles that would one day define him. Tommy Lee Jones' breakthrough came with Coal Miner's Daughter, 1980, where he played Doolittle Mooney Lynn, the husband of country music legend Loretta Lynn, portrayed by Sissy Spacek. The role demanded toughness and tenderness, qualities Jones carried naturally. His performance earned critical acclaim, and suddenly Hollywood realized this wasn't just another character actor. This was someone who could command the screen. The 1980s became a decade of steady growth. He appeared in films like The Executioner's Song, 1982, a television movie where his portrayal of convicted killer Gary Gilmore was haunting, intense, and unforgettable. The performance earned him an Emmy, cementing his reputation as an actor of rare depth. Yet, even as his career gained traction, Jones refused to play the Hollywood game. While other actors pursued roles that guaranteed fame, Jones pursued roles that challenged him. He was drawn to characters with edges, men haunted by inner battles. He didn't care about likability, he cared about truth. Throughout the decade, directors began to seek him out for his ability to elevate any script. He brought gravity to roles that might otherwise have been overlooked. He was not flashy, he was not smooth, but he was real. And in Hollywood, where illusion is everything, authenticity is a rare and precious thing. By the time the 1990s arrived, Tommy Lee Jones was no longer the outsider struggling to be seen. He was a force. And the roles awaiting him would not only define his career but also reveal the contradictions at the heart of who he was: the cowboy, the intellectual, the recluse, the reluctant star. By the late 1980s, Tommy Lee Jones was already recognized as one of the most commanding actors of his generation. But while his peers leaned into celebrity, chasing magazine covers and late-night appearances, Jones did the opposite. He slipped further away from Hollywood's orbit. To many in the industry, this refusal was baffling. Why wouldn't a man of his talent seize every opportunity to bask in the glow of Hollywood success? The answer was simple. Tommy Lee Jones never wanted to be a star. He wanted to be an actor. Fame, to him, was not just unnecessary, it was corrosive. Jones rarely attended Hollywood parties. He avoided interviews unless contractually obligated. When he did speak to the press, he was blunt, often curt, sometimes intimidatingly so. Reporters found him difficult. Fans found him mysterious. But Jones was simply protecting what mattered most to him: his privacy. Instead of living in Los Angeles, he returned again and again to his beloved Texas cattle ranch. There, he was not Tommy Lee Jones, Academy Award-winning actor. He was just Tommy, a rancher, a man who worked the land, who mended fences with his own hands, who rode horses under the vast Texas sky. The Hollywood spotlight could never compare to the quiet dignity of that life. It was this paradox that made him so fascinating: the cowboy who lived outside the law of Hollywood, yet whose presence within it made films unforgettable. To the public, he was larger than life. To himself, He was simply a man from San Saba who preferred the smell of leather and dust to the artificial flash of red carpets. And that refusal of stardom only made him more iconic. Then came 1993, the year everything changed. Tommy Lee Jones took on the role of U.S. Marshal Samuel Gerard in The Fugitive, opposite Harrison Ford. The character could have easily been played as a one-dimensional lawman, a side note in Ford's desperate escape story. But Jones transformed him into something electric, witty, relentless, unforgettable. Audiences were captivated. His sharp one-liners, delivered with dry authority, became part of pop culture. But beneath the humor and toughness, Jones brought humanity. Gerard was not just a lawman chasing a fugitive, he was a man driven by conviction. The performance earned him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. On that night, as Hollywood celebrated him, Tommy Lee Jones stood on the stage not as a man basking in glory but as a man slightly uncomfortable under the lights. His acceptance speech was brief, restrained, almost businesslike. He had done the work.
The rest to him was noise.
For most actors, an Oscar is the pinnacle, a prize that cements them as Hollywood royalty. For Jones, it was simply a marker along the road. He did not move to the Hollywood Hills. He did not become a fixture of award season parties. The morning after his win, he returned to his ranch. The cattle still needed tending. The fences still needed mending. The Oscar did not change Tommy Lee Jones. It only confirmed what he already knew.
He was among the best.
But his heart remained far from the glittering world that gave him the trophy. If The Fugitive made him respected, Men in Black, 1997, made him famous in a way he had never experienced before. Paired with Will Smith, then one of the brightest young stars in the world, Jones became half of an unlikely duo that would capture the imagination of audiences worldwide.
The film was a phenomenon.
Will Smith was all youthful charm, quick wit, and boundless energy. Tommy Lee Jones was his perfect counterbalance, stoic dry, with a deadpan delivery that made every line twice as funny. The contrast between them was magic. Suddenly, children knew his name. Families flocked to theaters not for a dark, gritty drama, but for a science fiction comedy where Jones played a man in black sunglasses keeping aliens in check. It was the widest kind of fame, the kind that comes with toys, posters, and pop culture references. For most actors, this would have been a dream come true. For Jones, it was bewildering. He did his job, he gave it everything he had, and then he retreated again to Texas. While the world laughed at his character's deadpan delivery and embraced him as a pop icon, Jones himself was back on horseback, away from the noise. Men in Black made him a household name. But in many ways, it also deepened the paradox of his life. He belonged to the entire world now, the face of one of Hollywood's most beloved franchises. Yet he still wanted nothing more than to be left alone on his ranch, a cowboy living out his days far from the chaos of Hollywood. Fame, in the end, had found him despite all his efforts to escape it. And that, perhaps, is the most heartbreaking truth of Tommy Lee Jones. He never wanted the spotlight, but the spotlight refused to let him go. By the early 2000s, Tommy Lee Jones had already proven himself as one of the finest actors of his generation. But what many people didn't expect was his turn as a filmmaker. In 2005, Jones directed and starred in The Three Burials of Melquiades Estrada, a haunting tale of justice, friendship, and redemption set in the rugged Texas-Mexico borderlands. The film was not designed to be a blockbuster. It was slow, meditative, morally complex. It dealt with illegal immigration, border violence, and the idea of honor in a dishonorable world. It was, in many ways, the truest reflection of who Tommy Lee Jones was, a man deeply connected to the land, unafraid of asking hard questions, uninterested in making things easy for audiences. Critics praised the film for its uncompromising vision. At the Cannes Film Festival, Jones won the award for Best Actor, and the film itself was celebrated for its raw storytelling. For Jones, it was not about accolades. Directing gave him something he had long sought: complete control over a story that mattered to him. The landscapes in The Three Burials mirrored his own inner terrain, wide, empty, filled with silence and struggle. Viewers could feel his presence in every frame, not just as an actor but as an artist trying to say something about life and justice in a world that often forgets both. Hollywood directors are often known for their flair, their egos, their hunger for attention. Jones was none of those things. He made films the way he lived life, with honesty, with grit, without compromise. The Three Burials stands today not just as a film but as a testament to Tommy Lee Jones' singular vision. A cowboy with a camera, determined to tell the truth as he saw it. As Tommy Lee Jones moved into the later stages of his career, his roles began to reflect the same themes that weighed heavily on his own life: aging, morality, the slow march of time. In 2007, he starred in No Country for Old Men, a film that would come to define modern American cinema. As Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, Jones delivered one of the most quietly devastating performances of his career. The sheriff was not a hero in the traditional sense. He was an old man confronting a world growing darker and more violent than he could understand. In the film's final moments, his monologue about dreams, loss, and the weight of a life lived felt less like acting and more like a confession. Audiences wept, critics raved, and for many, that performance became a mirror of the actor himself, the cowboy nearing the end of his trail. Later in Lincoln, 2012, he took on the role of Thaddeus Stevens, the fiery abolitionist congressman. His portrayal was sharp, commanding, and filled with moral conviction. Even in supporting roles, Jones stole every scene. His face, lined with age and experience, carried the weight of history. What made these roles so powerful was how closely they aligned with his own life philosophy. Jones had always been a man who valued justice, honesty, and integrity. Now, as he aged, those values came through in characters who struggled with the same questions. What does it mean to grow old? What does it mean to have lived with conviction in a world that often rewards compromise? The cowboy who once ran toward the fight was now pausing, reflecting, measuring the cost of the battles he had fought. And in those performances, Tommy Lee Jones gave us something more than entertainment. He gave us a glimpse of his own soul. While Hollywood celebrated him, Tommy Lee Jones lived far away from its bright lights. His home, his true sanctuary, was a sprawling cattle ranch in San Saba, Texas, not far from where he was born. For Jones, the ranch was not just a place to escape, it was the center of his life. He spent his days riding horses, repairing fences, working the land. He raised cattle, played polo, and lived by a rhythm that had nothing to do with film schedules or premieres. In Texas, he was not a movie star. He was a rancher, a neighbor, a man among men.
But solitude comes with a cost.
While many actors of his generation thrived in the camaraderie of Hollywood, Jones often stood apart. Colleagues respected him, even feared him at times, but few truly knew him. He was a man of walls, protective, private, unwilling to let many people inside. The ranch gave him peace, but it also gave him distance.
Distance from Hollywood. Distance from friends.
Distance, at times, from family. In choosing the life of solitude, Jones preserved his dignity but also invited loneliness. In interviews, he occasionally admitted that the land was his greatest comfort. The quiet hum of the countryside, the strength of a horse beneath him, the satisfaction of hard work, these things grounded him. But for those who admired him from afar, there was something quietly heartbreaking in that image. A man so loved by millions, spending most of his days in silence, accompanied not by applause but by cattle and sky. Behind the rugged exterior and Hollywood legend, Tommy Lee Jones' personal life was complicated. He was married 3 times, first to Catherine Larder in 1971, then to Kimberly Clowley in 1981, and finally to Dawn Laurel in 2001, who remains his wife today. His second marriage to Kimberly brought him 2 children, a daughter named Victoria and a son named Austin. Fatherhood, like everything in his life, was shaped by his seriousness and intensity. Those close to him said he loved his children deeply, though his demanding nature and his commitment to solitude often made family life difficult. There were stories, some true, some exaggerated, about his reputation for being difficult. On film sets, he was known for his intensity, for demanding the same level of dedication from others that he gave himself. Some directors found him challenging, others called him a gift. 4 co-stars, working with him could be intimidating, but nearly all agreed on one thing: his commitment to the craft was unmatched. Yet the myth of Tommy Lee Jones as a harsh, unyielding figure only tells half the story. Those closest to him spoke of kindness hidden beneath the gruffness, of a man who could be unexpectedly tender, surprisingly funny, deeply loyal. He was not easy, but he was real, and that in Hollywood is rarer than any award. At 79, his marriages, his children, his friendships, and his reputation all add up to a portrait of a man who lived life on his own terms. He was flawed like anyone, but he never pretended otherwise. The personal struggles, the divorces, the distance, the solitude, were all part of the cost of being who he was. And maybe that is the final truth about Tommy Lee Jones. He was not meant to be understood fully. He was meant to be witnessed, admired, remembered. A man who stood tall even in his silence, even in his struggles. By the time Tommy Lee Jones turned 79, whispers began to surface about his health. For decades, he had seemed indestructible, the kind of man whose very presence suggested strength and permanence. But time, even for legends, has a way of humbling us. Fans noticed the changes first in his posture, his movements, the slower cadence in his walk when he appeared in rare public settings. Gone were the long stretches of back-to-back projects that once defined his career. Instead, there were fewer appearances, and a quiet retreat from Hollywood spotlight. He no longer seemed interested in the relentless pace of the industry that had once consumed so much of his life. For his fans, the reality was difficult to accept. They had grown up watching him embody the unshakable lawman, the no-nonsense cowboy, the unyielding mentor. To see their hero appear frail, to sense his energy fading, was heartbreaking. Close friends have described this stage of his life not as a decline in spirit but as a surrender to nature's truth. "He's always known you can't outrun time," one longtime colleague said. But what makes him different is that he faces it head-on, without excuses, without complaint. And yet, it's hard not to feel a pang of sorrow watching the man who once seemed eternal begin to carry the weight of years. For Tommy Lee Jones, aging was not something to hide but something to meet with dignity, and that perhaps is his greatest role yet. In an industry of reinvention, where stars reinvent themselves to remain relevant, Tommy Lee Jones never had to. He was always the cowboy, whether in costume or not. Hollywood has had many men who wore the hat, but few who embodied it so fully. Comparisons to Clint Eastwood are inevitable. Both men built their careers on ruggedness, on silence that spoke louder than words. But Jones was different. He didn't romanticize the cowboy myth, he lived it. He knew the dust, the labor, the discipline of ranch life. His characters weren't fantasies, they were reflections of a world he actually understood. This authenticity gave him an edge. He wasn't just playing tough, he was tough. Off-screen, he lived by values that echoed a bygone era: integrity, hard work, and an almost sacred respect for privacy. While others courted fame, Jones resisted it. He never belonged to Hollywood in the truest sense. He was its reluctant hero, a man straddling two worlds but always keeping one foot firmly planted in Texas soil. To many, Tommy Lee Jones represents the last of something, the last great American cowboy in cinema. A man who could be feared on screen but who, off-screen, insisted on simplicity, honesty, and grit. Hollywood will move on, as it always does, but it's unlikely it will ever replace him. As Jones's presence in Hollywood diminished, those who had worked alongside him began to speak more openly about the man behind the hardened exterior. Will Smith, his co-star in Men in Black, often told stories of how Jones initially intimidated him.
He didn't smile much. He didn't do small talk.
But then I realized, that was him showing respect.
He wasn't fake.
He was real, and when he did laugh or share something personal, you felt like you'd earned it. Javier Bardem, who worked with him in No Country for Old Men, described Jones as a man of contradictions, sharp and stern one minute, unexpectedly gentle the next. Even Meryl Streep, who acted opposite him in Hope Springs, praised his ability to be vulnerable. He has this armor, this wall he carries around him. But once you're on the inside, you realize how deeply sensitive he is. Josh Brolin perhaps put it best: people were scared of Tommy Lee Jones, but they also loved him. He could be tough as nails, but you always knew it came from a place of honesty.
He didn't play games.
And in this industry, that's rare. These tributes reveal a fuller picture. The gruffness that made him legendary was also the shell protecting a man of quiet depth and surprising kindness. Away from Hollywood, Tommy Lee Jones has found his truest self in the places that shaped him: his sprawling cattle ranch in San Saba, Texas, and his polo ranch in Argentina. These lands are not merely properties but sanctuaries, reflections of a life lived close to the earth. On his Texas ranch, mornings often begin before sunrise. He rides out on horseback, overseeing cattle, speaking little, working much. The land demands respect, and he gives it willingly. There's no audience, no cameras, just the rhythm of hooves and the sound of wind against the mesquite. In Argentina, where he spends part of the year, polo remains his passion. Even as age limits how much he can ride, the sport symbolizes vitality, competition, and the spirit of camaraderie. Friends who visit describe him as happiest there, a man at ease among horses, dogs, and the open fields. And yet, there is a quiet melancholy to this existence. The isolation is both beautiful and sad, a reminder that while Jones has chosen a life away from Hollywood, it also distances him from the very world that once celebrated him. Still, for Tommy Lee Jones, this is where life makes sense. Amid cattle and horses, under vast skies, he has no need for applause or recognition. In his twilight years, he has returned to the essence of who he always was: a cowboy, a rancher, a man who belongs to the land. Tommy Lee Jones' legacy is etched in the characters he brought to life, characters that linger long after the credits roll. From the relentless pursuit of justice in The Fugitive, to the dry, stoic humor of Agent K in Men in Black, to the contemplative, world-weary Sheriff Ed Tom Bell in No Country for Old Men, Jones created roles that were unforgettable because they felt real. His work has inspired countless actors who grew up watching him. Many have spoken of his meticulous approach, his commitment to authenticity, and the way he transformed even minor parts into memorable moments. Young actors today study his performances not for glamour or spectacle, but to understand how subtlety, discipline, and honesty can create a screen presence that commands respect. Perhaps what makes his legacy most profound is that he never sought to dominate Hollywood. He did not chase popularity or box office numbers. Instead, he carved a career defined by integrity, depth, and courage, qualities that resonate far beyond the confines of film. To watch a Tommy Lee Jones performance is to witness a man who gave everything to his craft, and in doing so, became a benchmark for excellence in American cinema. Beyond the screen, Tommy Lee Jones is a man of remarkable intellect and diverse passions. Many who know him personally describe his love of history, literature, and philosophy. He reads widely, contemplates deeply, and questions relentlessly. A mind that has always sought understanding as much as performance. Polo, poetry, and philosophy are his private joys, glimpses into the life that few ever witness. He studies the classics, debates ideas with friends, and embraces a life of learning that mirrors his approach to acting, rigorous, deliberate, and intensely personal. These passions shape the man behind the roles. They explain the gravitas he brings to a courtroom scene, the quiet reflection in a Western standoff, the human vulnerability beneath a stoic lawman. To understand Tommy Lee Jones is to recognize that every role is informed by a life of thought, observation, and experience. A life lived far beyond the gaze of cameras and audiences. As Tommy Lee Jones has reached the age of 79, the themes of his films seem eerily prescient. In roles like Sheriff Bell in No Country for Old Men, he contemplates the inexorable passage of time and the inevitability of loss, reflections that mirror his own life. Aging has been quiet but undeniable. Where once he commanded rooms and scenes with effortless authority, he now navigates life with a gentler pace. Yet there is dignity in this slowing down, a conscious acceptance of impermanence. He does not rage against the years, he rides into them with a measured calm. The heartbreak comes not from scandal or misfortune, but from the human truth that even the strongest, most enduring spirits eventually confront vulnerability. For Tommy Lee Jones, this confrontation is not a source of despair but a testament to a life fully lived. He faces mortality as he has faced every challenge, with courage, focus, and quiet grace. At 79, Tommy Lee Jones is still with us, but fragile, reflective, and largely withdrawn from the world that once celebrated him. His life teaches lessons not of fame or fortune but of strength, solitude, and authenticity. He reminds us that true greatness is not measured by awards, box office numbers, or popularity, but by integrity, perseverance, and the courage to live life on one's own terms. The world may one day mourn the passing of this American icon, but his presence in cinema, in the quiet lessons of his life, remains eternal. In the end, Tommy Lee Jones' story is both inspiring and heartbreaking. It is the story of a man who built a towering career while remaining fiercely private, who became legendary while avoiding the trappings of celebrity, who lived deeply, honestly, and unapologetically. The cowboy may ride alone, but his trail leaves a mark that will never fade. If you were moved by Tommy Lee Jones' incredible journey, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the human side of Hollywood legends.